Anna, I'm so happy to have you join us all the way from Sweden.
Yes, thank you. I'm thrilled to be here with you.
Well, I was really intrigued with this concept of you. I know you've published a book, The Creative Doer, A Brave Woman's
Yes.
Guide from Dreaming to Doing. It strikes me
hmm
as very like the balance between the masculine and feminine, the dreaming into the action, the
hmm
the spiritual into the physical. But what is exactly a creative doer? How would you define that?
Good question. Um, I think many people, when they first hear that name, they get these associations of, just do it. We're gonna go for it, and we're gonna make things happen. And it's very like action oriented.
Mm.
And that's not really the kind of doing that I teach. The kind of doing that we're focusing on in the Creative Doer, in the book as well as the course and community that I host, is, well, it's an aligned doing, an embodied doing, a kind of doing that arises from a fullness. I always talk about creating from an overflow, where
Mm.
we sort of fuel ourselves to the point where we have so much to give that it sort of, just flows
Spilling
out of
out of
us.
us, really
Yeah,
without effort, maybe. Right.
exactly. There's always some effort involved when you're moving something from idea into form. There's
Hmm.
always a bit of friction there,
Right.
but it doesn't have to be the striving and the hustling. The grind culture is something I'm very intentionally trying to move away from, towards a doing that is anchored, I suppose, in being.
Mm.
But I mean,
Yeah.
I think you need both. I think you
Oh,
need the
yes.
being and then the doing in order to make things happen.
Yeah, you used a word that really struck me because it's very feminine, a place of fullness,
Mm-hmm.
which is that embodied. I think of, the earth in its
Yes,
fullness and, being the embodied feminine, she is creativity, she is creation in fullness. Um,
exactly.
how do you or how have you found to kind of move us into this sustainable place of, like, I guess, filling ourselves, being the fullness or
Mm-hmm.
claiming it maybe. I don't know, I just think of the busy mom who just has so many things to do that are just
Yes.
right in front of her. Um, how does a woman, I guess, and a man too, how do we move into fullness? It also connotates sort of this abundance
Yeah.
mentality as well. How does a person move and make that switch of lack and doing and, like you said, the grind culture and the hustle
Mm-hmm.
into embodied fullness?
Yeah. Well, I'd say it's a process of unlearning, first of all, because we come into this work, most of us do, heavily influenced, I mean, programmed by the patriarchal capitalist society that we live in, with the
Yeah.
grind culture and the focus on productivity at all costs, where the goal is so much more important than the process, and it's mind over matter, mind over body, and so on. So the first step is always the recognition of that, to see where we come from, what we come, like the baggage that we bring into this work. Because if we approach our creative work from that place,
Mm-hmm.
it's going to feel exactly like whatever work you've sort of fled from in order to
Right.
come to this heart's work, this work that you are longing for.
Mm.
But if you bring all of that into it, it's not going to be any different. So there's that. With my students, I talk about like untangling ourselves from the patriarchal fuckery that we have all grown up with
Yeah.
and been sort of ingrained with. And that is a process, and it's something that we need to be mindful of and aware of, and it's not necessarily comfortable.
I love
But
that you're a feminist writer, and I can feel that coming out of you and spilling out from your overflow of fullness. And I'm I'm very much with you on this patriarchal, the capitalism, the productivity over the peace, the productivity over the process or the journey.
yeah.
We're so attached to the goal or the outcome that we miss this beauty. And I'm actually in the process of writing quite a bit. Most of my time actually is being spent writing my book right now. And I find that I've had to really be conscious of not being attached to necessarily, I guess, the art of how it turns out, quote unquote, but this just enjoying this process, this creative flow that I'm constantly trying to like get into that flow. But in order to do that, I feel like I have to absolutely, shelve all the things that need done. And it still gnaws at me, but I cannot get into flow if I'm ruminating on things left undone. And I think that's very the productivity based.
Absolutely. We're going to do the to-do list first, and then if there's time left over, we're going to do the creative work then. And like for most of us, we never get there. There's no end to the to-do list. So we need to shift those priorities. That's also part of the work. Okay, I call it our heart's work. That one thing that really is tugging at us, that we're longing for.
So true.
And if that's going to happen, if that's going to be able to express through us, we're going to have to make it a priority. And I love that you mentioned before, like how the reality of a mother or a caregiver is you have like from morning to evening, a day full of interruptions, full of other people's demand on your time and energy and work. And so that's also something that we need to take into account. How much time and space do we actually have for this? Maybe we do have to give up on that idea that you need to, disappear into the cabin in the woods for 6 months in order to write the book. Maybe we have to look at ways to, it would be great, but it's not going to happen for most of us.
No.
But okay, so what if I have 15 minutes a day? How can I make that work? And is that possible to find those 15 minutes? And in those 15 minutes, prioritize that thing that is calling to us. What if we could make that choice and put that first on that to-do list, at least for those 15 minutes a day? Then what can we make happen? And I know for sure, since I work like that myself, I'm a mother of two and have all those responsibilities and all that mess going on in my life as well. And I've coached so many women through this process. So I know that you can create so much with those 15 minutes a day if you commit to it. And if you're willing to make the choices necessary to safeguard those 15 minutes and to commit to the relationship that you're stepping into when you're choosing your work. Because that's also central to the way that I view and teach this work, is that it's a co-creative process. It's not just you sitting down, bringing out what's inside of you. It's every idea and that longing that I was talking about. It's an invitation. There's something that wants to express through you and with you.
It's bigger than you.
It is. And everyone who's ever entered that stage of flow knows that it's bigger than us.
And something kind of, when I am in flow, I notice something kind of takes over and I'm just the vessel.
Yes.
Of what wants to come through. And this is another thing that happens quite frequently, I think, in the creative process, and it's the tortured artist syndrome. But that inner critic or the judge of how is this going to be perceived, or I guess some of the rhetoric that ruminates through my mind is just the past conditioning of, some of it is about the patriarchy, some of it is about who do you think you are, And I think artists have to wrestle with that no matter what your medium is. It's this it's trying to stay contained in that space of allowing whatever
Absolutely.
needs to flow without, and just silencing that inner critic. Yeah, it feels to me
Yes.
like that we get so attached to what we think that is how it's going to be perceived, that it inhibits that creative flow.
And usually this is even trickier for women because we are so focused on being likable.
Yeah.
We're taught to be that way. That's
Nice
sort
girl.
of the good girl, the nice lady, selfless, selfless mother. We have all these ideas about what it means to be a good woman, and very few of them support us in our creative work, in our commitment to our creative work. So there's lots to be reckoned with, and like you say, when you step into this relationship with your work, you say yes to doing the work. You need to know that this is going to come up. These voices are going to come up, and to deal with them is part of the process. It's part of the creation process. It doesn't mean that there's anything wrong with you or your work, or
yeah, it's like I'm
doing it
judging
wrong.
the fact that I'm judging myself.
Exactly. I mean, there's a thought loop there that isn't really helpful.
But yeah, we are conditioned that way, aren't we? To just the niceties, the screening, if you will, of our own desires, our own voice in favor of keeping the peace.
Yes.
Historically, that's what women have done.
Yeah, exactly. And not be perceived as threatening or quarrelsome, or just even having having a voice of our own, insisting that our voice and our story is relevant. Even that is can somehow be disruptive in a world where the male story takes precedence. It still does. That is changing, but slowly. And that's like, the male story is still the universal story, whereas a woman's story is sort of niche.
Yeah.
It's called women's literature even.
Best supporting actress.
Exactly. So to just claim your own voice and your own story, and to insist that it actually matters. It actually matters that I express this, that I say these things that only I can say. That in itself is sort of an act of, well, in some way, it's a revolutionary act. It changes things when you do that. And
I'm so inspired by people who historically have, put themselves up to be, I guess, shunned or exiled or marginalized because they are so honest, because they do speak their truth. And we just had Martin Luther King Jr. Day. Of course, this will air later, but he is one example of someone who spoke truth to power. I'm writing about Mary Magdalene. She did the same thing. Her archetype is coming through really powerfully right now, because those old paradigms are crumbling. We can't, it's no longer tenable for us to capitulate to the patriarchy, to capitulate to the capitalist rule, if you will. And those people I admire the most are those who were disruptors. And I'm trying to, in my own way, to be a kind disruptor, in the sense that I know that change cannot be exacted with the energy, the same energy that created it, that created the problem. I want to come to the table with more solutions. And so I find all this anger coming up, which is very justified. And I want to be honest about that. Also knowing that the people who made the most impact and exacted the most change historically have been those who put themselves out there. They got on a stand or a pulpit, so to speak, or they were a voice crying in the wilderness, and they disrupted the establishment. And they were
Yes.
usually killed or somehow martyred, or they were not even honored for decades after,
Yeah.
sometimes hundreds of years after they lived.
Yeah. And I think that's important to recognize as well. Many of them paid for it. And that may, to some extent, be different now as well, at least where we live. But it's still a fact that women who speak out are more, they suffer more online abuse.
So
They
true.
suffer more backlash in workplaces and so on. There are statistics on that. And I'm not saying that as a reason to stop us, but I'm saying that as a recognition
To
of
expect it.
what we face, and that the fear we feel about those things is actually valid. We can deal with the fear, and we can create enough of a sense of safety so that we can move forward anyway.
Mm-hmm.
But the fear is there, and it's real, and it's not helpful, I think, to ignore it or to override it, but recognize it and understand that, yes, I feel fear about speaking out, because speaking out can come with risks,
Right.
especially if you're a woman, especially if you're a woman of color, and all
Mm-hmm.
those marginalized identities that add on to that level of
Sure.
risk. So
Yeah.
I think it's necessary to honor that as well, and honor the courage that it takes to write a book like you're doing. Or
Actually, courage is my word for 2022.
oh
Uh,
yes,
it's as I'm writing about my story, I recognize too, it takes courage just to
yeah,
live. If I never wrote the book, if I never, you know, talked about the intricacies of why I chose what I chose and what happened to me in my life and whatnot, just the courage to for humans to live right now, to be in this space of I like the word contribution. I like the word collaboration, because this is bigger than us. This change that's here, that's at our feet, this uprising, it's more gentle. Some circles, maybe not so much, but this feminine rising, uh, we're all part of it. It's part of our incarnation. It's the reality. Um, so just living right now is courageous. It's creative
yes,
doing, just to be in your life,
yeah,
to be aware
exactly.
of
Just
it.
to be here right now and to stay connected somehow, to stay embodied, even though it's so scary to be a human right now. That in itself is an act of courage, and to manage to stay constructive. And creative work is always constructive when it comes from that place.
Mm,
So I feel like all of us need to sort of connect with that power,
mm,
and learn how to wield it so that we can amplify these contributions that we all have to make right now, whatever that looks like. I mean, not everyone is here to stand on the barricades. That's not necessary or needed. We come here, making different contributions, but we have a contribution.
yeah.
And I'm sort of wanting to call forth all the
So
women
how do you
to
call forth your heart's work? I feel like mine shifts and changes, but right now my heart's work is to write my story and to write this book, get it out there. And it's like you said, you have this longing for it, I think is how you defined it. There's a longing, it's pulling, it's tugging at you, it won't go
yeah.
away. And this has been the case for me in this project. But how does one say yes to their heart's work? We talk a lot about putting yourself out there and some of the risks involved with that, which I feel like is almost a prerequisite
Hmm.
to doing your heart's work. It doesn't matter what it is. It's going to involve some kind of risk.
Yes. Yes, even if it's just on a personal level, like taking up more space in your family or something like that.
Yeah.
And there's always some level of risk. But then again, there's always a risk in not following or heeding that call as well.
Right, right.
We lose something over
You
the
do.
years
I
when
feel
we
like
leave it.
I feel like one of the biggest markers for developing depression is the continual suppression of your heart's work. It's the continual depressing or pressing
Yeah.
down of what wants to come out, whether it's something you need to speak out or do, this creative doing process that you're talking about. When we keep suppressing it, I have this whole, I think we have been categorically oppressed, and so we suppress and we are depressed.
Yes, that's so true.
And this process for me, and recognizing this in other women, because I've, like you, I've coached, I've been coaching for a long time, and I've noticed that most of the women I attract are those who want permission. They want somebody to give them permission to do their heart's work.
Yes.
And they recognize they're on some level becoming ill because they have this deep longing, this sacred need to bring this out, but they feel a bit paralyzed.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that longing, if it goes unanswered for too long, it's almost as if it gets corrosive, like it starts eating away at you. But I also want to say that I think it's never too late to respond to it. And you asked before, like, how do you make that commitment? How do you step into the work and step into that relationship? And I think it's as easy as, I like to compare this relationship to any relationship in our life, because it helps make it more tangible somehow. Sometimes it can be so lofty. We're speaking about purpose and our contribution to humankind and so on. But really, in the day-to-day, when we step into relationship with another human being, for instance, we have an idea what that entails. We stay in touch. We do what we say we're going to do. We keep promises. We honor each other's differences, and we find different ways to show our appreciation and love and loyalty and so on. And it's not that different with the work. When you step into relationship with your work, your heart's work, what happens a lot of the time is that you get that first inspiration, you dive all in, and then it starts to get scary, which is natural. And then a lot of us freak out and desert this, like we leave it. And then we come back 3 months later and we wonder why it's all gone cold, you know?
I totally relate to that.
If you behave that way to another human being, that relationship is not going to work. It's the same. Yeah. So what I think, what's most important is really just to honor the relationship. And it's another metaphor is a fire. You keep it going by adding some more firewood every now and then, even if it's just embers at time. If you keep it going, it can sort of burst into flames at any time. If it goes cold and dies out, it's a much bigger project to get it going again, you know?
Yes.
So it's just that it doesn't have to be a big deal, like we said, 15 minutes a day or whatever you have available to you. The most important part is the commitment and the willingness to show up and to keep showing up, and to understand that the fear and the friction that will show up is also part of the process and something that can be dealt with, and it doesn't have to stop you, and so on.
I love that. There's a quote, I think it's by Jim Rohn. He said, "Doing isn't difficult, deciding is."
Yes.
And that made me think of that when you said commitment.
And to keep deciding, that's the most important part. The first decision is easy.
You have to decide every day, sometimes every moment, to honor that commitment. And I love how you made it a relationship. It comes back to kind of where we started with the relationship between spirit and matter. And one of my teachers, she's taught me that that writing is actually a masculine task. It's fueled by the feminine and this fire you're talking about. But you have to do it. You literally have to put your hands on a keyboard or your notebook and do it. And you will not get that flow until you're engaged.
Yes.
And so I think backing way up, like you said, it's that commitment. It's like no one decides. Yeah, you can decide, and it doesn't just happen once. It's like you said with the relationship. Oh, I love you, and if I change my mind about that, I'll let you know. You have to nurture these things, and
exactly.
Yeah. So that fire, I've noticed that when I create space, I can create the container to do this creative work, and I block out my schedule and I do it. And then I'm like trying to make sure everything's in order around me. And then I do it. And sometimes, even though I've decided, even though I've got everything staged, if you will, and I've eked out the time, it still takes a while sometimes for it to reveal itself, to flow. Why do you think that is? When we say yes and we're sitting there, I'm like, okay, I'm going to create now. Anytime now is good, universe and higher self and God. It's great for you to pop in anytime and help me out here.
Yeah. But I think you can think about that like from different perspectives. And one of the things I see is that we come into the work, or we come into our hour of writing with maybe too much going on. We bring an energy to it that is just disrupting that connection and that flow that we are looking for. That's one thing. And the other thing is, I think also that there is some level of mystery involved here. And we show up for the work, but we cannot always expect the flow to come like when you push a button.
Yeah.
There is an element of grace involved. It is a gift when it happens. And I like to think that my work is to show up. And sometimes we have this divine meeting and things flow through me, and it's beautiful. And sometimes it's just me typing away on my keyboard. And the interesting thing is that sometimes good stuff happen then as well. Like sometimes when I have this writing session and it feels a bit heavy or at least uninspired, and I'm experienced enough to not bother too much about that, especially not on the first draft stage. My work is just to get it out on the page. But then when I return to it later, actually, wow, yeah, there was something here and something that I can keep exploring and working with. And so I don't think we should come to the work expecting that magic or that flow, but we can come there and we can make room for it. We can set the container for it. We can, do our best to empty ourselves and be available to it, so to speak, so that if it wants to, it can show up for us and meet us. But to remember that it is a gift and a grace.
Yeah, I love that. I mean, I think just that heaviness of the expectation doesn't allow for, that flow to happen. Wow, this is great. I love how you talked about the work is the commitment. It is the shifting of the priorities. It is the something daily, even if it's only 15 minutes, it's something. And that, a cumulative effect oftentimes, because I find when I'm in the energy of stop, start, like you said, it can go cold for months. And I was absolutely on fire with it the 3 months previous. And I've done this for years with this project. but also trusting and giving myself some grace because it wasn't the time
No.
before. And I wanted to commit to it. Uh, I, I had the longing, I felt the pull, but this season of my life, it just wasn't the right time, but it is now.
Yeah.
And even saying that, I still have to be very clear on my boundaries
Yes.
with myself, with my family, with the other people that pine
Mm-hmm.
for me and my attention in my business. And I find that, and I can't remember who said this, and I'm going to say it wrong, but I think it's Abraham Hicks or something that talked about when you say yes, when you put it in your calendar, when you put the commitment into effect, the universe moves. You could call it grace, but grace seems to be very random, right? And that's why it's a gift. We don't know when we're going to get it. It's free, but we don't know when it's going to show up in powerful ways. But we put ourselves in a position to receive grace when we are consistently, like you said, showing up. You said your job is just to show up. And sometimes that doesn't mean doing. Sometimes it means receiving, oh,
Yeah.
I thought I was going to sit here and write today, but I think I need to meditate.
Yeah.
Whatever. I'm just throwing things
Yes.
out there.
That's super important point you're making here. And also about the timing, like you said, for a few months, it wasn't the right time. And I do believe that each project that we embark upon comes with its own built-in timing. And sometimes what we experience as procrastination is simply just the necessary pause
Mm-hmm.
for us to get into alignment with that right timing. And then once we get started, things happen according to that plan, and it's easy again. But sometimes we're so used to the idea that we decide the goal and the deadline and so on, and then we are just going to produce.
Yeah. Which doesn't work so well.
It rarely works. And that doesn't mean that you can't show up. But sometimes, like you say, showing up for your work is sometimes about feeling that well, making sure that you come to the work from a place of fullness. And sometimes that means you sleep more for 3 months or you learn about something necessary for the thing that you're about to express.
For me, it was trauma release.
Yeah.
I couldn't
Yes.
maintain the space of fullness or flow because I had things I needed to release.
Yeah.
And it's not like we're ever going to arrive at this place of being completely cleansed or clear, whatever. But I found that when you were saying I took that pregnant pause that they call it, where I was at the back of my mind, like, oh, I really need to get this book done. I really need to write. Also knowing that this was a time for healing. This was a time for if I want to be this receiving vessel where things can flow through me, I have to create some space inside. And that means releasing trauma. So it was a hard lesson. And it was something I resisted.
Yes, we do. We tend to do that. But the thing is, even though that sort of delayed, within quotation marks, your work for a few months, what you did there will feed into your work now that you have come to the point of actually being able to write again. So nothing is lost.
Yeah, well, yeah, it was definitely good writing material, I will say.
Right.
Well, how can people find you, Anna? How can people find your work?
Well, the best place is my website, which is just annalovind.com. You'll find my blog and all lots of free resources, my ebook, and so on there. You can also find me on Instagram. Same, my name, Anna Lovind, which is actually the only social media platform I'm active on. It's my platform of choice. And even there, I'm not, it's intermittent. I allow myself that way of working. So those are the best places. The only way to work with me at this point is to join the Creative Doer, the course and community. But a place to start could be to read the book, simply.
Yes, and I actually am going to go grab it. From dreaming to doing, the Creative Doer, a brave woman's guide from dreaming to doing.
Yeah.
So beautiful work. Thank you for reminding me about this creative process and how everything is aligning in divine timing and seasons. And yeah, you just strike, I'm like really calm as I'm talking to you. Thank you. Thank you for your presence today.
Well, thank you. It's been a joy talking to you. And good luck with the book.
Oh, thank you.